Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 1, Chapter 10, The Mobilization of the Navy, July 31 to August 4. The meteor flag of England shall yet terrific burn, till danger's troubled night depart, and the star of peace return. Quote by Campbell. There was complete agreement in the Cabinet upon every telegram sent by Sir Edward Grey and in handling of the crisis. But there was also an invincible refusal on the part of the majority to contemplate British intervention by force of arms should the Foreign Secretary's effort fail and a European war begin. Thus, as the terrific week wore on and the explosion became inevitable, it seemed probable that a rupture of the political organism by which the country had so long been governed was also rapidly approaching. I lived this week entirely in the official circle, seeing scarcely anyone but my colleagues of the Cabinet or of the Admiralty, and moving only to and fro across the Horse Guards between Admiralty House and Downing Street. Each day, as the telegrams arrived, showing the darkening scene of Europe and the cabinets ended in growing tension, I pulled over the various levers which successively brought our naval organization into full preparedness. It was always necessary to remember that if peace was preserved, every one of these measures, alarmist in their character and involving much expense, would have to be justified to a Liberal House of Commons. That assembly, once delivered from the peril, would certainly proceed upon the assumption that a British participation in a continental struggle would have been criminal madness. Yet it was not practicable often to divert the main discussions of the Cabinet into purely technical channels. It was therefore necessary for me to take a peculiar and invidious personal responsibility for many things that had to be done when their turn came. I had also to contemplate a break-up of the governing instrument. Judged by reports and letters from members, the attitude of the House of Commons appeared most uncertain. On Thursday evening I entered into communication with the Unionist leaders through Mr. F.E. Smith, footnote, afterwards Lord Birkenhead, end of footnote. I informed him of the increasing gravity of the European situation and of the military preparations which were everywhere in progress in Europe. I stated that no decision had been reached by the Cabinet, and that I had received letters from one or two Unionists of influence protesting vehemently against our being drawn into a continental war. I asked him to let me know where he and his friends stood on this supreme issue. He replied at once that he himself was unreservedly for standing by France and Belgium. After consulting with Mr. Bonar Law, Sir Edward Carson, and others who were gathered at Sir Edward Goulding's house at Wargrave, he sent me the following written assurance, which I showed to Mr. Asquith the next morning, on Saturday. Mr. F. E. Smith to Mr. Churchill, July 31, 1914. I have spoken to my friends, of whom you know, and I have no doubt that on the facts as we understand them, and more particularly on the assumption, which we understand to be certain, that Germany contemplates a violation of Belgian neutrality, the government can rely upon the support of the Unionist party in whatever manner that support can be most effectively given. Saturday, August 1, 1914. To Secretary and First Sea Lord. It seems certain that the order to mobilize will be issued after Cabinet this morning. Having everything in readiness, examination service should be put into force simultaneously. Winston S. Churchill. At the Cabinet I demanded the immediate calling out of the fleet reserves and the completion of our naval preparations. I based this claim on the fact that the German Navy was mobilizing and that we must do the same. The Cabinet, who were by no means ill-informed on matters of naval organization, took the view, after a sharp discussion, that this step was not necessary to our safety, as mobilization only affected the oldest ships in the fleet, and that our main naval power was already in full preparedness for war and the fleet in its war station. I replied that though this was true, we needed the Third Fleet ships, particularly the older cruisers, to fulfill the roles assigned to them in our war plan. However, I did not succeed in procuring their assent. On Saturday evening I dined alone at the Admiralty. The foreign telegrams came in at short intervals in red boxes which already bore the special label Subcommittee, denoting the precautionary period. The flow was quite continuous, and the impression produced on my mind after reading for nearly an hour was that there was still a chance of peace. Austria had accepted the conference, and intimate personal appeals were passing between the Tsar and the Kaiser. It seemed to me, from the order in which I read the series of telegrams, that at the very last moment Sir Edward Grey might succeed in saving the situation. So far no shot had been fired between the great powers. I wondered whether armies and fleets could remain mobilized for a space without fighting and then demobilize. I had hardly achieved this thought when another Foreign Office box came in. I opened it and read, "Germany has declared war on Russia." There was no more to be said. I walked across the Horse Guards Parade and entered 10 Downing Street by the garden gate. I found the Prime Minister upstairs in his drawing-room. With him were Sir Edward Grey, Lord Haldane and Lord Crewe. There may have been other ministers. I said that I intended instantly to mobilize the fleet notwithstanding the Cabinet decision, and that I would take full personal responsibility to the Cabinet the next morning. The Prime Minister, who felt himself bound to the Cabinet, said not a single word, but I was clear from his look that he was quite content. As I walked down the steps of Downing Street with Sir Edward Grey, he said to me, "You should know I have just done a very important thing. I have told Cambon that we shall not allow the German fleet to come into the Channel." I went back to the Admiralty and gave forthwith the order to mobilize. We had no legal authority for calling up the naval reserves, as no proclamation had been submitted to His Majesty in view of the Cabinet decision, but we were quite sure that the fleet men would unquestioningly obey the summons. This action was ratified by the Cabinet on Sunday morning, and the royal proclamation was issued some hours later. Another decision, and a painful one, was required. Sir George Callahan's command of the Home Fleet had been extended by a year, and was now due to end on October 1. It had been announced that he would then be succeeded by Sir John Jellicoe. Further, our arrangements prescribed that Sir John Jellicoe should act as second-in-command in the event of war. The First Sea Lord and I had a conference with Sir George Callahan on his way through London to the north on the 30th. As the result of this conference, we decided that if war came, it would be necessary to appoint Sir John Jellicoe immediately to the chief command. We were doubtful as to Sir George Callahan's health and physical strength being equal to the immense strain that would be cast upon him, and in the crash of Europe it was no time to consider individuals. Sir John Jellicoe left London for the fleet with sealed instructions, directing him, on the seals being broken, to take over the command. On the night of August 2, when we considered war certain, we telegraphed to both admirals, apprising them of the Admiralty decision. It was naturally a cruel blow to Sir George Callahan to have to lay down his charge at such a moment, and his protests were re-echoed by practically all the principal admirals who had served under him and by Sir John Jellicoe himself. It was also a grave matter to make a change in the command of the fleet at this juncture. However, we did what we thought right, and that without an hour's delay. To Sir John Jellicoe I telegraphed, "Your feelings do you credit, and we understand them. But the responsibility rests with us, and we have given our decision. Take up your great task in buoyancy and hope. We are sure that all will be well." Sir John Jellicoe assumed command on the evening of August 3, and received almost immediately an order from the Admiralty to proceed to sea at daylight on the 4th. Footnote: Sir George Callaghan was immediately appointed by the very important command of the Nore, which he filled with distinction throughout the war. End of footnote. The cabinet sat almost continuously throughout the Sunday, and up till luncheon-time it looked as if the majority would resign. The grief and horror of so many able colleagues were painful to witness. But what could anyone do? In the luncheon interval I saw Mr. Balfour, a veritable rock in times like these, and learned that the Unionist leaders had tendered formally in writing to the Prime Minister their unqualified assurances of support. I returned to the Admiralty. We telegraphed to our Commander-in-Chief. Today, August 2, at 2:20, the following note was handed to the French and German ambassadors. Begins, "The British government would not allow the passage of German ships through the English Channel or the North Sea in order to attack the coasts or shipping of France." Ends. Be prepared to meet surprise attacks. The French naval attaché, the Comte de Saint-Seine, had been summoned. The following is the précis of our conversation. August 2, 1914. The First Lord, in the presence of the First Sea Lord and Chief of the War Staff, informed the French naval attaché of the Cabinet's decision and the note on naval matters handed to Monsieur Cambon at 2:20 p.m. August 2. In order to prepare for the possibility of an alliance being concluded between the governments, but without prejudging the question, the following preliminary steps are to be taken. The package containing the secret signal books to be distributed and opened but not used, mutual regulations for the entry of Allied ships into each other's ports to be issued now, the officers in command of the Mediterranean and China stations will be given permission to enter into communication with the French senior officers in command on their stations. Certain staff questions were discussed, but the First Lord clearly pointed out that these involved no question of policy which would have to be decided by Parliament. The general direction of the naval war to rest with the British Admiralty. The direction of the Allied fleets in the Mediterranean to rest with the French, the British Admiral being junior. In the event of the neutrality of Italy being assured, France would undertake to deal with Austria assisted only by such British ships as would be required to cover German ships in that sea, and secure a satisfactory composition of the Allied fleet. British naval bases would be at the disposal of the French. Should any portion of the German main fleet make its way south towards the Mediterranean, it would be followed by a superior British force. Meanwhile, events were influencing opinion hour by hour. When the Cabinet met on Sunday morning, we were in presence of the violation of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg by the German troops. In the evening, the German ultimatum to Belgium was delivered. The next day arrived the appeal of the King of the Belgians that the guaranteeing powers should uphold the sanctity of the treaty regarding the neutrality of Belgium. This last was decisive. By Monday, the majority of Mr. Asquith's colleagues regarded war inevitable. Discussion was resumed on Monday morning in a different atmosphere, though it seemed certain that there would be numerous resignations. Before the cabinet separated on Monday morning, Sir Edward Grey had procured a predominant assent to the principal points and general tone of his statement to Parliament that afternoon. Formal sanction had been given to the already completed mobilization of the fleet and to the immediate mobilization of the army. No decision had been taken to send an ultimatum to Germany or to declare war upon Germany, still less to send an army to France. These supreme decisions were never taken at any cabinet. They were compelled by the force of events and rest on the authority of the Prime Minister. We repaired to the House of Commons to hear the statement of the Foreign Secretary. I did not know which of our colleagues had resigned or what the composition of a war government would be. The aspect of the Assembly was odd but resolute. No one could mistake its intention. Sir Edward Grey made his statement with the utmost moderation. In order that there should be no ground for future reproaches, he informed the House that the Germans were willing to comply with the British demand that no German warships should be sent into the English Channel. The sombre march of his argument carried this weighty admission forward in its stride. When he sat down, he was possessed in an overwhelming measure of the support of the Assembly. Neither he nor I could remain long in the house. Outside, I asked him, "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we shall send them an ultimatum to stop the invasion of Belgium within 24 hours." Some of the ministers still clung to the hope that Germany would comply with the British ultimatum and would arrest the onrush of her armies upon Belgium. As well recall the Avalanche as easily suspend in mid-career the great ship that has been launched and is sliding down the ways. Germany was already at war with Russia and France. It was certain that in 24 hours she would be at war with the British Empire also. All through the tense discussions of the cabinet, one had in mind another greater debate which must begin when these were concluded. Parliament, the nation, the dominions, would have to be convinced that the cause was good, that the argument was overwhelming, that the response would be worthy. I did not for a moment doubt. But it seemed that an enormous political task awaited us, and I saw in the mind's eye not only the crowded House of Commons, but formidable assemblies of the people throughout the land requiring full and swift justification of the flaming action taken in their name. But such cares were soon dispersed. When the council doors had opened and ministers had come into the outer air, the British nation was already surging forward in its ancient valor, and the empire had sprung to arms. Men met each other with erected look. The steps were higher that they took. Friends to congratulate their friends made haste, and long inveterate foes saluted as they passed. Quote by Dryden. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, a drama of intense interest and, as it ultimately proved, of fatal consequence, was being enacted. The event which would dominate all others, if war broke out, was the main shock of battle between the French and German armies. We knew that the French were counting on placing in the line a whole army corps of their best troops from North Africa, and that every man was needed. We were informed also that they intended to transport these troops across the Mediterranean as fast as ships could be loaded, under the general protection of the French fleet, but without any individual escort or system of convoys. The French General Staff calculated that, whatever happened, most of the troops would get across. The French fleet disposed between this stream of transports and the Austrian fleet afforded a good guarantee. But there was one ship in the Mediterranean which far outstripped in speed every vessel in the French navy. She was the Goeben. The only heavy ships in the Mediterranean that could attempt to compete with the Goeben in speed were the 3 battlecruisers. It seemed that the Goeben, being free to choose any point on a front of 300 or 400 miles, would easily be able to avoid the French battle squadrons and, brushing aside or outstripping their cruisers, break in upon the transports and sink one after another of these vessels crammed with soldiers. It occurred to me at this time that perhaps that was the task she had been sent to the Mediterranean to perform. For this reason, as a further precaution, I had suggested to the First Sea Lord, as early as July 28, that an additional battlecruiser, the New Zealand, should be sent to reinforce our squadron. When it came to the pinch a few days later, Admiral Bou de la Perrière, the French commander-in-chief, adopted a system of convoys, and on August 4 he prudently delayed the embarkation of the troops until he could organize adequate escorts. But of this change of plan the Admiralty was not advised. On July 30 I called for the war orders of the Mediterranean Command and discussed them fully with the First Sea Lord. These orders, issued in August 1913, had to take into consideration a variety of political contingencies, that is, Great Britain at war with Germany only, with Germany and Austria only, or with Germany, Austria, and Italy, and Great Britain and France allied together against each or any of the 3 aforesaid opponents. The course to be followed differed somewhat in each case. Briefly, if Britain found herself single-handed against the whole Triple Alliance, we should temporarily have to abandon the Mediterranean and concentrate at Gibraltar. In all other cases, the concentration would be at Malta, and if the French were allies, our squadrons would join them for a general battle. It now seemed necessary to give the commander-in-chief in the Mediterranean some more specific information and directions. Admiralty to Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean, July 30, 1914. It now seems probable, should war break out and England and France engage in it, that Italy will remain neutral and that Greece can be made an ally. Spain also will be friendly and possibly an ally. The attitude of Italy is, however, uncertain, and it is especially important that your squadron should not be seriously engaged with Austrian ships before we know what Italy will do. Your first task should be to aid the French in the transportation of their African army by covering and, if possible, bringing to action individual fast German ships, particularly Goeben, which may interfere with that transportation. You will be notified by telegraph when you may consult with the French admiral. Except in combination with the French as part of a general battle, do not at this stage be brought to action against superior forces. The speed of your squadrons is sufficient to enable you to choose your moment. You must husband your force at the outset, and we shall hope later to reinforce the Mediterranean. These directions, on which the First Sea Lord and I were completely in accord, gave the Commander-in-Chief guidance and the general conduct of the naval campaign. They warned him against fighting a premature single-handed battle with the Austrian fleet, in which our battlecruisers and cruisers would be confronted with Austrian dreadnought battleships. They told him to aid the French in transporting their African forces, and they told him how to do it. That is, by covering and, if possible, bringing to action individual fast German ships, particularly Goeben. So far as the English language may serve as a vehicle of thought, the words employed appear to express the intentions we had formed. Sir Berkeley Mahon, according, replied on July 31 that he would keep his forces concentrated in readiness to assist the French fleet to protect the transports, and he rightly left our trade in the eastern Mediterranean to shift for itself. In this posture he awaited permission to consult with the French admiral. This permission could not be given him till August 2 at 7:6 p.m., when I telegraphed as follows to our commanders-in-chief all over the world. Situation very critical. Be prepared to meet surprise attacks. You can enter into communication with the French senior officer on your station for combined action in case Great Britain should decide to become ally of France against Germany. Earlier that same day the following, initialed both by the First Sea Lord and myself, was also sent to Sir Berkeley Milne from the Admiralty. Goeben must be shadowed by 2 battle cruisers. Approaches to Adriatic must be watched by cruisers and destroyers. Remain near Malta yourself. It is believed that Italy will remain neutral, but you cannot yet count absolutely on this. At 12:50 a.m. on August 3, I emphasized the importance of the Goeben compared with all other objectives by a further telegram, which I drafted myself to Sir Berkeley Milne. Watch on mouth of Adriatic should be maintained, but Goeben is your objective. Follow her and shadow her wherever she goes, and be ready to act on declaration of war, which appears probable and imminent. Early on the morning of August 4, we were delighted by the following news from the Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean to the Admiralty. Indomitable, indefatigable, shadowing Goeben and Breslau, 37 degrees 44 minutes north, 7 degrees 56 minutes east. We replied, "Very good, hold her, war imminent. This to go now. Goeben is to be prevented by force from interfering with French transports. This to await early confirmation." I then sent the following minute to the Prime Minister and Sir Edward Grey. Memorandum, most urgent, to Prime Minister and Sir Edward Grey. German battlecruiser Goeben and fast light cruiser Breslau have been found west of Sicily and are being shadowed by British battlecruisers Indomitable and Indefatigable. It would be a great misfortune to lose these vessels, as is possible in the dark hours. She is evidently going to interfere with the French transports which are crossing today. The following telegram has already been sent. Good, hold her, war imminent. We wish to add this. If Goeben attacks French transports, you should at once engage her. An immediate decision is required. Winston as Churchill. Sir Edward Grey agreed to this, and so did the Prime Minister, but the latter asked that it should be mentioned to the Cabinet, which was meeting almost immediately, for their confirmation. On this I sent, before going to the Cabinet, the following. If Goeben attacks French transports, you should at once engage her. You should give her fair warning of this beforehand. The Cabinet, however, adhered formally to the view that no act of war should be committed by us before the expiration of the ultimatum. The moral integrity of the British Empire must not be compromised at this solemn moment for the sake of sinking a single ship. The Goeben, of course, did not attack the French transports. In fact, though this we did not know at the time, she was steaming away from the French transport routes when sighted by the Indomitable and Indefatigable. Even if, however, she had attacked transports, the decision of the British Cabinet would have prevented our battle cruisers from interfering. This decision obviously carried with it the still more imperative veto against opening fire on the Goeben, if she did not attack French transports during the hours when we had her in our power. I cannot impeach the decision. It is right that the world should know of it. But little did we imagine how much this spirit of honorable restraint was to cost us and all the world. In consequence of the Cabinet decision, the First Sea Lord sent by my directions the following telegram from the Admiralty. Admiralty to all ships, August 4, 2:5 p.m. The British ultimatum to Germany will expire at midnight Greenwich Mean Time, August 4. No act of war should be committed before that hour, at which time the telegram to commence hostilities against Germany will be dispatched from the Admiralty. Special addition to Mediterranean, Indomitable, Indefatigable. This cancels the authorization to Indomitable and Indefatigable to engage Goeben if she attacks French transports. At about the same time, I received the following minute from the First Sea Lord. To First Lord, August 4. In view of the Italian declaration of neutrality, propose to telegraph to Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean, acquainting him and enjoining him to respect this rigidly and not to allow a ship to come within 6 miles of the Italian coast. Bearing in mind how disastrous it would be if any petty incident occurred which could cause trouble at this fateful moment with Italy, and approving of the First Sea Lord's precaution, I replied in writing, August 4. So proceed. Foreign Office should intimate this to Italian government. Winston S. Churchill. Thereupon, at 12:55 p.m., the following telegram was sent by the Admiralty to the Commander-in-Chief in the Mediterranean. Italian government have declared neutrality. You are to respect this neutrality rigidly and should not allow any of His Majesty's ships to come within 6 miles of Italian coast. This certainly, as it turned out, was destined to complicate the task of catching the Goeben, but not, as it will appear, in a decisive manner. During the afternoon I sent the following minute to the Chief of Staff and the First Sea Lord. August 4, 1914. I presume you have fully informed French Admiralty of our intentions and that the closest cooperation has been established at all points with the French fleet. If not, this should be done immediately. Winston S. Churchill. On this, the Chief of the Staff sent the following telegram to all stations. You can enter into the closest cooperation with the French officers on your station. Throughout this long summer afternoon, 3 great ships, Hunted and Hunters, were cleaving the clear waters of the Mediterranean in tense and oppressive calm. At any moment the Goeben could have been smitten at under 10,000 yards range by 16 12-inch guns firing nearly treble her own weight of metal. At the Admiralty we suffered the tortures of Tantalus. At about 5 o'clock Prince Louis observed that there was still time to sink the Goeben before dark. In the face of the cabinet decision I was unable to utter a word. Nothing less than the vital safety of Great Britain could have justified so complete an overriding of the authority of the cabinet. We hoped to sink her the next day. Where could she go? Poda seemed her only refuge throughout the Mediterranean. According to international law, nothing but internment awaited her elsewhere. The Turks had kept their secret well. As the shadows of night fell over the Mediterranean, the Goeben increased her speed to 24 knots, which was the utmost that our 2 battlecruisers could steam. She increased her speed still further. We have since learned that she was capable for a very short time of an exceptional speed, rising even to 26 or 27 knots. Aided by this, she shook off her unwelcome companions and vanished gradually in the gathering gloom. We shall return to this story in due course. At 5:50 p.m. we sent the following message. Admiralty to all ships. General message. The war telegram will be issued at midnight authorizing you to commence hostilities against Germany, but in view of our ultimatum, they may decide to open fire at any moment. You must be ready for this. Now, after all the stress and convulsion of the preceding 10 days, There came to us at the Admiralty a strange interlude of calm. All the decisions had been taken. The ultimatum to Germany had gone. It must certainly be rejected. War would be declared at midnight. As far as we had been able to foresee the event, all our preparations were made. Mobilization was complete. Every ship was in its station, every man at his post. All over the world, every British captain and admiral was on guard. It only remained to give the signal. What would happen then? It seemed that the next move lay with the enemy. What would he do? Had he some deadly surprise in store? Some awful design long planned and perfected, ready to explode upon us at any moment now? Would our ships in foreign waters have been able to mark down their German antagonists? If so, morning would witness half a dozen cruiser actions in the outer seas. Telegrams flowed in from the different naval stations round our coasts, reporting the movements of vessels and rumors of sightings of enemies. Telegrams still flowed in from the chancelleries of Europe as the last futile appeals of reason were overtaken by the cannonade. In the war room of the Admiralty, where I was waiting, one could hear the clock tick. From Parliament Street came the murmurs of the crowd, but they sounded distant and the world seemed very still. The tumult of the struggle for life was over. It was succeeded by the silence of ruin and death. We were to awake in pandemonium. I had the odd sense that it was like waiting for an election result. The turmoil of the contest seemed finished. The votes were being counted, and in a few hours the announcement would be made. One could only wait. But for what a result! Although the special duties of my office made it imperative that I, of all others, should be vigilant and forward in all that related to preparation for war, I claim, as these pages show, that in my subordinate station I had in these years before the war done nothing wittingly or willingly to impair the chances of a peaceable solution, and had tried my best as opportunity offered to make good relations possible between England and Germany. I thank God I could feel also in that hour that our country was guiltless of all intended purpose of war. Even if we had made some mistakes in the handling of this awful crisis, though I do not know them, from the bottom of our hearts we could say that we had not willed it. Germany, it seemed, had rushed with head down and settled resolve to her own undoing. And if this were what she had meant all along, if this was the danger which had really menaced us hour by hour during the last 10 years, and would have hung over us hour by hour until the crash eventually came, was it not better that it should happen now? Now that she had put herself so hopelessly in the wrong, now that we were ready beyond the reach of surprise, now that France and Russia and Great Britain were all in the line together. The First Sea Lord and the Chief of the Staff came in with French admirals who had hurried over to concert in detail arrangements for the cooperation of the two fleets in the Channel and in the Mediterranean. They were fine figures in uniform, and very grave. One felt in actual contact with these French officers how truly the crisis was life or death for France. They spoke of basing the French fleet on Malta, that same Malta for which we had fought Napoleon for so many years, which was indeed the very pretext of the renewal of the war in 1803. Mal ou la guerre. Little did the Napoleon of St. Helena dream that in her most desperate need France would have at her disposal the great Mediterranean base which his strategic instinct had deemed vital. I said to the admirals, "Use Malta as if it were Toulon." The minutes passed slowly. Once more, now in the march of centuries, Old England was to stand forth in battle against the mightiest thrones and dominations. Once more, in defense of the liberties of Europe and the common right, must she enter upon a voyage of great toil and hazard across waters uncharted, towards coasts unknown, guided only by the stars. Once more, the far-off line of storm-beaten ships was to stand between the continental tyrant and the domination of the world. It was 11 o'clock at night, 12 by German time, when the ultimatum expired. The windows of the Admiralty were thrown wide open in the warm night air. Under the roof from which Nelson had received his orders were gathered a small group of admirals and captains and a cluster of clerks, pencil in hand, waiting. Along the mall, from the direction of the palace, the sound of an immense concourse singing "God Save the King" floated in. On this deep wave there broke the chimes of Big Ben, and as the first stroke of the hour boomed out, a rustle of movement swept across the room. The war telegram, which meant "Commence hostilities against Germany," was flashed to the ships and establishments under the white ensign all over the world. I walked across the Horse Guards parade to the cabinet room and reported to the Prime Minister and the ministers who were assembled there that the deed was done.